the grooming gangs, is now trying to take out Labour ministers.
One of the survivors has said, and I quote, "Jess Phillips needs to be removed because I don't think her conduct during this has been acceptable for the position that she holds." That is, those aren't my words. Those are the words of a survivor. It is a shame that Labour MPs are drowning that out. The member for Birmingham Yardley has clearly lost the confidence of the victims. Does she still have the confidence of the Prime Minister?
Those aren't my words, but she wants the Labour Minister, Jess Phillips, who has campaigned on violence against women and children more than any other MP, devoting much of her professional life to the cause, to be sacked. She also claims the government is trying to water down the inquiry and accused it of waging a briefing war against rape survivors without offering any evidence. A truly grim performance. But more important, we also learned today just what a Horlicks Keir Starmer's government is making of this inquiry. 4 victims have already resigned from the panel and both potential chairs are walking away. It is falling apart. The Prime Minister rejected the victims' call for a judge to lead this inquiry, but didn't seem to give a very convincing explanation of why. He announced that Dame Louise Casey was going to support the inquiry. Well, there's a new law of politics in Britain. If something is going terribly wrong, or is appallingly complicated, or is just too embarrassing for actual ministers, they send for Louise Casey. Now, we all love Louise Casey. She's a plain-speaking, takes no prisoners, no-nonsense toughie. But she has become an all-purpose human shield in politics. Rough sleepers, homelessness, rape gangs, social care, bad behaviour by the Met. There must be a brass and oak lever in the Prime Minister's office reading, "In case of emergency, pull for Casey." But in this case, she is supporting the inquiry. She's not chairing it. We don't know exactly what she is supposed to do. And Downing Street didn't seem to know either. We don't know, and they won't say, exactly when she was asked to do whatever she was asked to do. Was it perhaps just a few minutes before the Prime Minister stood up in the Commons? Now, none of this feels particularly robust or reassuring. Let's begin by talking to Robbie Moore, the Conservative Environment spokesman and MP for Keighley, who has been working with victims of the gangs. Can I ask you, first of all, I had a pop at your leader there for trying to get Jess Phillips' resignation. Now, Jess Phillips has been standing up every year reading out the names of women murdered by their partners. She's campaigned endlessly as a backbencher and then in government about this. What has she done that's so terrible that means that she should resign on this matter?
Well, no doubt Jess Phillips has a lot of experience on this issue, and she, as a backbencher under the last administration, campaigned relentlessly on this. But this is about trust. And clearly what has happened in the last few weeks, the trust by those victims and survivors, like Fiona Goddard, who I know well, having had first correspondence from her when I got elected back in 2019, the trust has failed of the minister by those victims that were on the panel.
Do we know why?
Well, clearly, the minister took the position that she wanted to say that those victims that came off the panel, those 4 victims, were putting out misleading information, false information about the conversations that were taking place about the terms of reference and the scope of the inquiry. We know that because she said that at a dispatch box yesterday, and we also know that from a letter that she sent to the Home Affairs Select Committee where she used the word of misrepresentation. Now, I believe Fiona. And I believe that when you have victims and survivors that have gone through these heinous crimes, being classified as liars by the British state continuously for far too long, decades, and then to be put back in that scenario, it is incredibly, goes against all of that trust that should have been put in place. Well, trust has failed against the safeguarding minister.
I agree it's about trust. I'm just trying to work out what specifically she has done, because she does seem to me to be one of the, as it were, one of the good guys in all of this, has been trying very hard to get justice. And in terms of the victims, we've had them on the show, and lots of victims have different views. And I'm just wondering if we're going to be in a position where nobody is actually trusted by the victims, nobody from the state, nobody from the authorities at all, and therefore this whole, cavalcade ends up being pointless.
But from Baroness Casey's review that came out in June, the recommendation to government, quite rightly, was that this would be a very tightly focused national inquiry, specifically focusing on group-based child sexual exploitation, gang-related grooming. There is an absolute concern, and we've now seen that through the emails that have come out into the public domain, that there was a undertaking to consider widening the scope beyond those recommendations from Baroness Casey and geographically. So it wasn't specifically focusing tightly on local authority areas like Bradford that I've campaigned on consistently, but much bigger geographical areas as well. And that's wrong to go against those recommendations from Baroness Casey.
Well, clearly there are areas where it has been particularly horrendous, and we all know about Rotherham and so forth, Telford. But this has been happening all around the country. And I know there is an argument saying, yes, we have to focus on the worst cases, and this inquiry should. But actually, this kind of grooming gang, these sex rape gangs, frankly, have been occurring all over the country, including in London, including everywhere. And therefore, we need an inquiry which will cover it all.
Absolutely, which is why we need that national inquiry, which is the recommendation of Baroness Casey. And the structure that she has recommended on page 151 of her report is effectively that you have a overarching chair, independent, terms of reference are set, with very locally focused investigations on micro-local areas like the Bradford district, for example, that feed in under an umbrella of terms of reference set by the independent chair. And that's why we need to go forward. That will then hopefully install that trust back in those victims and survivors in the state under all political parties that have failed those individuals for far too long.
They certainly have been failed. I absolutely agree with that. Baroness Casey has many jobs on her plate at the moment, but the way you're talking, it sounds to me as if you'd quite like her to run this inquiry.
Well, look, I have huge admiration for not only Baroness Casey, but Professor Alexis Jay. I sit on the Home Affairs Select Committee, and I've been lucky enough to ask them both questions. What I think is key for whoever is the independent chair is that victims and survivors have trust in that individual. Now, I absolutely feel that a judge should be part of those considerations to lead that inquiry, but ultimately it's those victims and survivors having trust in that individual that runs it. And I would argue that victims and survivors have trust in Baroness Casey, and therefore they are going behind her recommendation.
She would be a good boss. I mean, I listened to Jess Phillips in the Commons yesterday, sounding to me very vehement about denying that they were trying to water down the inquiry, saying anything involving ethnicity or the origins of the gangs was absolutely forefront central, and she would have no truck with trying to water that down. So why is your party saying again and again and again the government is trying to dilute the terms of the inquiry?
Because we have seen that from the words that have come out very much from those 4 victims that have removed themselves from the panel. So the words
they think that, but ministers are promising that's not the case.
Well, I do not agree with the minister. I very much, having known Fiona
So you think
Goddard,
the ministers are behaving dishonestly?
I feel that the approach that the safeguarding minister took in response to a UQ yesterday in the Chamber was incredibly dismissive and not acknowledging at all the concerns that the victims and survivors were quite rightly putting to her. And therefore the trust has now been removed. And therefore, because Jess Phillips cannot now be trusted by many of those key victims and survivors that were trying to influence the terms of reference and ultimately appoint the chair, I feel that the safeguarding minister needs to be removed from this process.
Let's try and put the politics slightly to one side and just ask, if that were to be the case, what would be your candid and friendly advice to the Prime Minister about how to get this back on track?
Be incredibly open and honest that the process that has been adopted to date since the Home Secretary gave that announcement and confirmation that there would be a national inquiry in June, that it needs to be the most forefront of his focus. This is the biggest scandal that has haunted communities like I represent, and indeed many others in across the United Kingdom for far too long. Yeah. There is a huge amount of political pressure being put on the Prime Minister, quite rightly, by many of those victims and survivors and their wider families, many of whom I have met. I urge the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary to take complete focus on this, regain that trust, because ultimately we all want those victims and survivors to see the convictions to follow by those that have been carrying out these crimes, but also trust to be installed back in the process.
We can certainly agree on that. Robbie Moore, thank you very much indeed. Let's follow up now with Peter Davies, the former CEO of the National Crime Agency's Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, who is now Safeguarding Advisor for VOOP. Peter, thank you very much indeed for coming on to the show.
My pleasure, thank you.
So, you know this area very well. When you look at what is quite clearly the inquiry plan just falling to pieces in front of our eyes, what do you think has gone wrong and what should be done to put it back together again?
Well, I have been watching with great interest, and of course I was around in this particular subject matter when the previous inquiry was set up, and that was not without its problems in finding a chair. That was not it without its problems in being organised. So I'm not being dismissive, and I think this is a very serious matter, but this has happened before in terms of getting this inquiry. And I think that may be partly because it's an extremely difficult topic to grasp. And I'm not a politician, never have been, never will be.
And there is a toxic atmosphere around it.
And I have to say the toxic atmosphere does not help. It may not be possible to do anything about that, but my observation is the same as I published in 2011, which is that this subject matter is so important, it merits calm, objective consideration and people submitting what may be their usual instincts for the greater good of actually getting this right for victims at last. If you think about how many people have become victims of this appalling criminality since the first inquiry was announced over 10 years ago, if actually the fact is that the things that needed fixing still haven't been fixed, that's not a good advertisement for our ability to do better. And of course the voices of victims should be at the centre of this. And my initial feeling is I don't know how to keep politics out of this, but I somewhere there will be people working extremely hard on the ground or behind the scenes to try and fix things now. And we somehow need to support them while allowing politics and big issues of public trust to be played out.
The Prime Minister, when he was asked about why this couldn't be a judge-led inquiry, said two reasons: it would take too long to get the judge in effect, and B, having a judge would mean that individual court cases brought by victims would be delayed. Now, I don't quite understand why that would be the case, because the court system is so gummed up, so slow anyway. But do you believe it should be a judge in the end?
I can see absolutely why victims might feel it should not be somebody with a professional background, a leadership role.
So
in
not
any
a
of the
social
main
worker,
agencies.
not a police
not
officer.
A former police officer, exactly. I have to say.
Yeah.
So who are you left with? It may be a judge, maybe a senior legal practitioner with some expertise in the area. There may be other people to bear in mind, but it is a very difficult chair to fill, especially, I have to say, when it's still not really clear what this inquiry is going to do. I think the remit should be more narrow than the previous one, the one led by Alexis.
Okay,
Jane.
just explain in as clear terms as you can, Peter, what you think the remit should be. I
think the remit should be to get to the data. We've had a lot of action done by different agencies. The key thing that's missing from Baroness Casey's report, which is excellent, is that after all this time, people haven't really grasped the data.
So by the data, you mean how many children were raped, how many men were involved,
evidence
for
gathering,
how long?
How prevalent is this type of criminality? Because it doesn't always show up in the courts, it doesn't always show up to police. How prevalent is it? Answer the question about the over or under representation of people of different ethnicities in the offender group and also in the victim group, and then you know something more about the problem than we did even after a dozen years. I think that's the most important thing, and my concern is these inquiries can have a tendency to hit the pause button on all kinds of important change that would otherwise be made, and I do share the Prime Minister's sense of urgency about it, even if I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything he's said in detail in PMQs today, for example.
Well, we certainly have to get on with this. Peter and Robbie, thank you both very much indeed for coming in. Now, as you'll have heard from my other colleagues already today, LBC's been well across this story from the beginning, to the point that we were able to exclusively reveal the withdrawal of the frontrunner to chair the inquiry this afternoon. We're going to speak to our reporter who got that scoop, but you're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:17.
This is LBC.
When's the perfect moment to take that leap? With electric vehicles, that moment is now. The all-electric Leap Motor T03. Right now, with the Leap Grant, it's incredible value at 169 deposit and 169 per month with 0% APR, with amazing tech and spec too. Leap Motor. It's time to leap. Search Leap Motor T03. Personal contract purchase, mint green, T03, 48 months. Optional final payment 5675. Leap Motor is credit broker, not in lender. Subject to status. T's and C's, Stellantis Financial Services.
I'm telling you, raise taxes, that's how.
Cut spending, less waste, more sense.
Move north, get more for your money.
Until winter hits your heating bill.
Fair.
Up to 9.13% annual return. We all agree that's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to ignore.
Cufflink. Auto invest property backed from £500. Visit cufflink.com. That's KUFLINK. Register your interest today. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to IF ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
At TfL, we're helping to make bus journeys greener. Our entire bus fleet is 100% low or zero emission at the tailpipe, including those for our Superloop routes, helping improve air quality for all. And we'll have a fully zero emission fleet by 2034. That is how we're making the greener way to travel brighter for everyone. Search TfL Improvement Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. Greener than total estimated petrol and diesel car emissions.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:18. Now, you heard a little while ago that a second likely chair for this very difficult inquiry, Jim Gamble, has also decided to step aside. This was a scoop from my colleague, LBC's reporter Henry Riley, and Henry is with me now. Congratulations, Henry. Tell us more.
Yes, so Jim Gamble, thanks, Andrew, the former police chief. He's been very involved in this particular area in terms of child exploitation, but he has now pulled out of the appointment process. We got wind of this a little bit earlier on this morning, and I was hearing from a source very close to the process that they felt it was distracting from the overall message, this criticism of the two prospective candidates. Now, we did have Annie Hudson, who was the other candidate, a former director of children's services at Lambeth. She withdrew yesterday, and then we broke the story, as you mentioned, that Jim Gamble had also quit, the only other prospective candidate, but he came out fighting.
For those people out there who have been mischief-making, for those people that have said to everybody, well, he's an ex-police officer. Do you know what? I'm an ex-police officer, that's true, because I resigned in protest at the political interference with the Developing Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre.
And in the last hour or so, we've had reaction from the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, speaking with LBC.
The government's grooming gangs inquiry is clearly collapsing. The survivors have walked out. The people they wanted to appoint as chairs have quit. Clearly, trust is gone. All we've seen is month after month of delay, denial and dysfunction.
Well, if it can't be a former police officer, even if, as he says, he resigned because of political pressure, and it can't be a child expert who's also gone as well, and it can't be a judge because the Prime Minister says it can't be a judge. Who's left?
Well, what was interesting is Keir Starmer, as you say at PMQ, is very forthright. It can't be a judge. He argues because then it would have to wait till all of the sort of criminal proceedings that are ongoing have finished before the inquiry can start. But when I got wind of this, Andrew, I didn't have it didn't have it confirmed. But I was watching Keir Starmer effectively defending the fact that it wasn't going to be a judge-led inquiry, thinking Jim Gamble was still in the process, but knowing that we were going to break the story imminently that he wasn't. I think ultimately, if the survivors, and indeed the four who have quit, we understand, all want a judge-led panel, I think if they're calling for that, and the Prime Minister gave a bit of an olive branch today, saying though they've quit, if they ever want to come back on board with the process, the survivors, we'd welcome them back with open arms. I think if they're calling for it, Andrew, it's likely it will go down that route.
Dangerous to predict, but I think we will end up with a judge-led inquiry.
And I hear Baroness Casey, who's involved with the process, will be involved in selecting the new chair as well, which could be interesting because she's obviously a lot of experience in this field. We know she's going to support the work of the inquiry, but in choosing that judge, potentially, or the new chair, I think the hope is that victims will get behind her.
All right. Well, again, congratulations, Henry. Great story. And now something very different. We speak on this show about what is going on the front line in the Ukraine war, but we rarely get to hear from people who are actually there. I spoke to Dimko Zhluktenko, a drone pilot in Pokrovsk, where there have been reports of Russian war crimes against civilians. I first wanted his reaction to the dreadful news out of Kharkiv today, where a day centre has been hit with reports of children among the dead.
It makes us feel awful, plainly awful. That's because there is not enough tools for us to protect something that we love the most, our families, our homes, and our kids. And generally, when we see those news also on the social media, on the positions, it makes all of us feel devastated. But we also know that it's not new for Russian forces. They have been doing that since 2022 when they started bombing the theaters in Mariupol with big sign, kids written in Russian in front of it. Another big one was Oblast in Kyiv 2024 attack that basically cancer hospital for the kids. Also, I think 50 wounded, and some of the kids were killed in that strike. So it's nothing new, unfortunately.
Dreadful news. But I wanted a wider discussion with Dimko, so I asked him what an average day looks like for him. What is the essence of a drone fighter's job?
My job is being a drone pilot in the armed forces of Ukraine. So what I do is I pilot the drones that do the reconnaissance. So we could spot Russians where they are trying to assault our positions in the infantry and do our best to delete them with the tools like HIMARS and other strike tools that we have in the arsenal.
And you've been inside the besieged town of Pokrovsk recently, where it has been alleged that Russian groups infiltrating have committed war crimes. Tell us more.
I have been in the area, and definitely we are doing the reconnaissance on that area and watching closely to delete all of those infiltrating groups. But this is definitely our tactic, to use small infantry groups. Basically, they are for one-time use. Most of them get deleted, not even getting into the area of the city on their way in, maybe like 10 kilometers away from the front line.
So, sorry to interrupt, but you're saying when they come in small groups, it's basically suicide missions. They'll all be killed eventually, and they do it again and again, presumably just to disrupt.
Yes, absolutely, you're right. And they do so in extreme amounts, and they do that to overload the infantry guarding the city, even though most of them are getting deleted on their way in, not even getting to the outskirts of the city.
But we've seen images, at least, of an elderly man, a woman on a bicycle, and another woman being basically gunned down, being shot in cold blood by these Russian infiltrators.
Yes, and this is what we see on the drone footage as well, mostly. They are committing various types of the war crimes, even to their own, and not respecting any rules of war. To them, basically, they are very low IQ fighters, I guess.
So as somebody who spends your time observing Russians on the front line, is it your impression that they're actually very poor quality troops? They're not fighting very effectively?
I would say there is a mix. There is a mix of very low quality meat grinder kind of troops that come in enormous amounts. At the same time, there is some percentage of highly trained specialists who are doing the, I would say, the heavy lifting of getting into the city and getting behind the lines, which makes the defense much more problematic. But 90% of Russian forces in the area is mostly just one-time use infantry, I would say.
And Pokrovsk itself is a town absolutely, I think, completely surrounded now. And it has been suggested that Pokrovsk is going to have to surrender to the Russians many, many times, but it's still fighting on, still there.
I am hearing all of those questions about the surrender of Pokrovsk since 1 year ago, I guess. And I would say now it's quite easier than it was 1 year ago, just because the actual front line isn't a line anymore. It's a zone. And because of that small tactics group and the amount of infantry that Russians have, I would say that the front line is like a 5 kilometer kill zone that is from both sides. And it's not besieged. I wouldn't say so. It's still possible to get into the city. It's still possible to get the supplies in, even though a lot of Ukrainian supply runs are being done by the unmanned ground vehicles and also by unmanned aerial systems, drones.
Let me ask you more generally about the morale at the front line, because your President Zelenskyy, Dimko, had a very difficult meeting again with Donald Trump, and Trump allegedly said to him that he had to surrender Ukrainian land, otherwise the entire country would be destroyed. What's your feeling at the moment?
My feeling is that there is no surrender wide here among the troops. Not whatsoever. We are ready to fight for however long it takes. And actually, we are doing quite well at deleting Russian forces and making it very painful for them. Also, there are no ceasefire whatsoever, because what we are seeing is endless Russian assaults with the infantry, with the APCs, the APVs, even tanks that we have seen in the area. We're going to fight them. There is no surrender. We just need more tools, more ammo to do the job. Ammo, drones, and that's it.
So if Donald Trump was listening into this, and who knows, would you say to him, that's the message, give us the tools and we'll finish the job?
Yes, and this was the message all along. We are ready to fight with our own blood, with our own efforts, but just give us the tools so we could do that and finish it.
Now, you are a drone pilot, so you're not actually in the air yourself, but presumably you have to be pretty close to the front line. Are you yourself in danger? Do you think about your family? How does it feel?
I am endangered, but not as much as the infantry guys. So they do most of the heavy lifting and face no danger, but we are also a subject for enemy, let's say, counter-battery war. Their drones try to find us, our launch spots, and destroy us. This is their main job. So we face FPV drones, we face artillery, and we face a lot of guided bombs, cubs. I think about my wife at home, and I really hope to come back to her one day. She's in the western part of the country, in the city of Lviv, around 1,000 kilometers from active warfare.
We'll be thinking very much of you in the weeks and months ahead. Dimko, thank you so much for talking to LBC. A change in the Children's Act is being hailed as a groundbreaking victory in the protection of the most vulnerable children in our society. Find out what and why next. But the time now is 6:29 and Tim Humphrey has your news headlines.
A 15-year-old boy who stabbed a fellow pupil to death at a school in Sheffield has been sentenced to more than 15 years in prison. Mohammed Umar Khan, who's also 15, attacked Harvey Wilgoose with a hunting knife in February after the pair had a falling out. The man, thought to be the only remaining candidate to chair the government's inquiry into grooming gangs, has withdrawn. Jim Gamble has criticised what he calls political point scoring over the issue. It's thought the number of migrants who've come to the UK on small boats this year has already surpassed last year's total. Nearly 39,000 people made the journey across the Channel in 2024. LBC weather becoming increasingly wet and windy overnight, with yellow warnings in place and a low of 2 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
Prince Andrew, is he about to be called before a House of Commons Select Committee to be grilled by MPs about the leasing arrangements for his property in the grounds of Windsor Park? It looks like it could be coming a step closer. That's all on the latest episode of The Newsagents. Listen now by using our free Global Player app.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
I'm telling you, raise taxes, that's how.
Cut spending, less waste, more sense.
Move north, get more for your money.
Until winter hits your heating bill.
Fair.
Up to 9.13% annual return. We all agree that's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to ignore.
Cufflink. Auto invest property backed from £500. Visit cufflink.com. That's KUFLINK. Register your interest today. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to IF ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
They did it again. Flower instead of flowers on my birthday. I'm 95 minutes late, but it's hard to leave when you've shared so much. Your postcode, your gluten intolerance. Then I saw it. 25% off your first Ocado shop. Plus free delivery. And I just knew I'd found the online supermarket of my dreams. Ocado. Life delivered. Geographical restrictions. Min spend £60 and charges apply. Max saving £20. New customers only. Terms at ocado.com.
A Southern train is a place where you can have more me time. A chance to skip traffic and glide to wherever you need to be. With headspace to focus on more important matters. Like if that cloud is a starfish or sunflower. Fast journeys without the rush with great deals at southernrailway.com. Terms apply.
It's the last chance to get yourself a ticket for tonight's Lotto draw.
It could be you.
Lotto. from the National Lottery. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:32. 11 years ago, Claire Throstle's two sons, Jack and Paul, were murdered by their father. He was already considered to be a violent and dangerous man, but because he was their father, he had been given contact with them. Now the law is being changed so that family court judges no longer have to assume that parental involvement is in a child's best interests. Let's hear now from Dr. Marie Tidball, the Labour MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge. And you've been campaigning, Marie, on this subject for a long time. Let's start off, because I think the family who started this whole change in the law are your constituents.
They are indeed. My incredible constituent, Claire Throstle, MBE, who is the mother of Jack and Paul Sykes. Today is the 11th year anniversary of their death after they were killed in a house fire set alight by their father, who was a known domestic abuser.
And he locked them in and then deliberately closed all the doors so that no one could escape.
It's tragic. He lured them into the attic with the promise of a train set and then locked them in the attic and then set 14 fires around the house and killed himself. And tragically, Jack tried to save his younger brother, Paul, and tried to drag him out. And that probably had a negative impact on his own chances of survival, but showed great bravery.
A truly heartbreaking story, that. But I suppose legally the question is, why the father? Because he'd hit the children and he'd hit his wife, I think, beforehand. He was known to be dangerous, known to be violent. Why he was given access, I think, for several days at a time to the boys.
So that's right. The children were on a 5-hour court-permitted contact visit, unsupervised, when the murder of Jack and Paul took place. That was despite the fact that Claire had been stood in the way of a fist that was aimed at one of her sons, and it hit her with such force that she fell down the stairs. And there was repeated incidents very similar to that. The children were force-fed peas until they were sick by the father. The courts knew about that. Social services knew about that. Cafcass knew about that. Indeed, only a couple of days before, one of the Cafcass officers was barricaded into their office by Jack and Paul's dad. And yet nothing was done to stop that contact visit that led to their death.
There is clearly an archaic assumption in the law that a parent is always deserving of contact with the children. Whatever happens, the parent comes first. And this is what's now being changed. But this all happened 11 years ago. Yeah. Why has it taken so long?
Well, 5 prime ministers before Keir Starmer became prime minister, nothing happened. Claire only met one of them. And when I first met Claire, I knew her story. I grew up in Penistone, the hometown of Jack and Paul as well. Was at my secondary school that I went to on Remembrance Day event, where the head teacher of the school also reads out the names of Jack and Paul, and Claire lays a wreath. And I met Claire there, and she told me her story firsthand. And I said to her, if I become elected as your MP, I will help you fulfil your promise to your boys for their voices to be heard by reversing the presumption of contact and repealing that in law.
This is how and why parliamentary constituency politics works, I guess. Is it possible to say how many families up and down the country have one or other parent who is a danger, who will be protected by this law when it changes?
Well, sadly, some of these numbers are still unseen. What we do know, Andrew, is that in the last 30 years, there's been 67 deaths of children on permitted contact visits as a result of the presumption of contact. And in addition to that, this is not just about children that are at risk of homicide by a known domestic abusive parent. This is also about sexual violence, rape, and physical abuse too. And we know just in the 9 months from April last year, 2024, there were 40,000 cases on Cafcass's books where there was known domestic abuse that were then going to be processed in the family courts. Around 60% of all cases in the family courts involve domestic violence.
Well, you spend a lot of the day talking about the grooming gangs, but this is clearly, as it were, a parallel story we really need to concentrate on. Do you have any sense of how long it's going to take to actually change the law?
We went to Downing Street yesterday, Claire and I, to meet the Prime Minister, who has said, the first Prime Minister that said in the 6 Prime Ministers she's seen in the 11 years she's been campaigning on this, that he will fulfil her promise to her boys and repeal this law. We will do it as soon as possible within parliamentary time. And for your listeners and viewers, that just means that what we need to do, because the presumption is in primary legislation, we need to repeal that through an Act of Parliament. So it has to be an amendment to a bill which it's in scope of, and that has to go through the parliamentary process to repeal those other pieces of legislation.
Well, a very important moment and good news for lots of harried families and families in danger around the country. Dr. Tidball, thank you so much for coming in and explaining it to us. Now, a by-election is happening tomorrow in Wales, and it is of major significance. Our political correspondent, Aggie, Chambre, has been in Keighley as people prepare to go to the polls.
You know who you're going to vote for?
I do.
Are you going to tell me?
I ain't.
I'm here in Cardiff, just by the Welsh Parliament, and I'm about to take a tour of Wales to try and get a sense of how people are going to vote in Keighley in that crucial by-election later in the week.
I think I might go for Plaid. It might be Plaid or Green, I'm not sure.
I absolutely love the way that Nigel Farage is focused on making the country better.
British politics needs a massive shake-up. And I'm kind of leaning towards something different other than Conservative or Labour. So, Plaid Cymru maybe, but I'm like that about reform.
Tough question. I haven't got a clue, because I think people are getting bored of it. Like, my philosophy is, and this is as crazy as you think, but put real people in there.
What are people worrying about here at the moment?
I think nationally, immigration, that we don't have a big problem in immigration at the moment in Keighley. I'm certainly not seeing it, but for me, I am worried about that.
There's no improvements going on in Keighley. It's being run down and run down and run down.
He just makes me ill.
You talking about Keir Starmer?
Yeah, oh yeah, quoting about Keir Starmer, he just makes me ill. He's like, have you seen him? There's nothing in him.
Personally, I don't dislike Keir Starmer. I just don't think he's had a great year.
Well, that's supposed to be Labour Wales. I was thinking Labour, but you didn't hear that much.
You didn't hear that word once, no, Andrew. And it's been for the Welsh Senedd constituency of Keighley. Labour have held the seat since devolution in 1999. But a poll released last week basically heard exactly what I heard there, which is Reform with 42% of the vote, Plaid Cymru with 38%, and Labour trailing on 12%. But I didn't meet one person who was definitely planning to vote for Labour.
And before I forget to say so, I should certainly say there is a full list of candidates running Keighley on the LBC website, lbc.co.uk.
And it was interesting listening to what people were worried about in Keighley, because people were talking about what you hear about a lot nationally as well, cost of living, immigration. It was interesting what that lady was saying about immigration, because immigration in Keighley is actually the lowest rate in most of Wales. It's 2.9%.
But she still raised it nonetheless.
She still raised it nonetheless. And I spoke to, when I was in Wales, to Leonard Morgan, the first Minister of Wales, and she was talking about immigration and basically saying she thinks a lot of the worries about immigration are being whipped up on social media. And I was speaking to another Labour grandee about why they think people are moving away from Wales, or at least it seems like people are moving away from Welsh Labour. And they said part of it is the rise of Reform UK, but in a way that is unexpected. But it's because people now have an opportunity to vote for someone who is not Labour, not Conservative, and not the Welsh nationalists either.
It seemed to me there was a kind of air of confusion, almost as if voters are trying to come to terms with a new electoral world in which both Labour and the Conservatives have crashed in popularity. And yes, you've got Reform and Nigel Farage, but you've also got Zach Polanski and the Greens. And in Wales, of course, you've got Plaid as well. In a multi-party system, it is almost impossible to game the result.
I think that is completely right. And actually one of the people was saying, and we didn't use that clip there, but one of the people who I spoke to in Keighley was basically saying they think we are moving towards a kind of more European government system where it is way more of a coalition. But this by-election in Keighley will really matter if Labour lose it too. And obviously it's still very much an if, people going to the polls tomorrow, because it means that Welsh Labour will lose their working majority in the Senedd.
It's highly significant. And then, of course, you've got the big Senedd elections coming next year. Aggie, since you're here, let me ask you about two individuals, really. We were talking a lot about Louise Casey at the beginning of the show, this extraordinary figure who has become an all-purpose kind of human shield and answer to every problem government has. And you begin to think after a while, if she's doing this and that and all across, why do they just, cut to the chase and give her the top job herself? Put her in running the cabinet.
Running the cabinet. I mean, some people may be thinking maybe she's just run the country. I don't think there's suggestions of that. But there are people suggesting today that maybe she should take Chris Wormold. He's the current cabinet secretary, should take or could take his job, because there is a huge amount of briefing around against him, first of all, in the Times this morning. But other people are actually suggesting she doesn't want that job. She's not interested. She's got her hands full. So I think that one is certainly one to watch. But I've actually heard some of that briefing myself today, Andrew, and people being very, very critical of Chris Wormold, calling him ineffective and saying he is the opposite of mission delivery. But other people worried about that briefing against officials who basically can't answer back.
He just has to listen to it. He can't pop up on this programme or go anywhere else or go in front of a microphone and defend himself. And that's what's unfair about this. But the weird thing about it all was that he was appointed at roughly the same time as Keir Starmer and people around him were saying, the centre of British politics just doesn't work. We need to rip up the wiring. We need to rebuild it. We need to restructure it completely. We need radical change. And Chris Wormold, of all the candidates for the top job, was the most small C Conservative, most conventional. And everybody seemed to know this. And yet they went ahead anyway. And now people are briefing against him, and he may even have to be fired.
I think that is what some people feel very, very uneasy about. And it's that, he was appointed very recently, but it's also, there has been we talked about it on the programme before, there's been so much churn in number 10. And somebody suggesting to me, basically, what does this say about Keir Starmer? And also, who's going to take the job next if they expect to be briefed about in this way? I should just tell you quickly, the number 10 spokesperson said earlier, the Cabinet Secretary continues to have the support of the Prime Minister and they're working closely together.
Well, that's very nice to hear. Aggie, thank you so much for that. Now to another knotty problem. Thanks to the triple lock, which means that state pensions must rise each year by inflation or wage increases or 2.5%, whichever is the highest, it was announced earlier today that the new state pension is going up to £12,000, £548 in April. Given the pressure on the benefit system and our ageing population, many people regard the special guarantee for pensioners as unaffordable. But politicians are generally far too scared to say so. My next guest, Damian Green, was Deputy Prime Minister under Theresa May and is a former Work and Pensions Secretary. Damian, thank you very much indeed for joining the show. Are you that rare thing, a British politician or a retired politician, who is prepared to say that the triple lock is bonkers?
I think bonkers is a strong word, but yeah, it's got to go. And it's one of those things where perhaps only ex-politicians can not just think the unthinkable, but say the unsayable, because it's largely served its original, noble purpose of lifting huge numbers of pensioners out of poverty, and it increasingly feeds into the feeling that this country is unfair between the generations.
Yes.
And
yes.
So I think that for that reason alone, it ought to go. And the other thing is that we all know it's going to go eventually, because we can all, people have done the maths and show how many tens of billions of pounds extra are added to public spending by it. And the longer you put off decisions like that, as they have done in France, and as indeed they're going backwards on the pension age in France, the bigger the political cataclysm at the end of it. So, I accept it's going to be brave for a current politician to say what I'm saying. But nevertheless, the sooner they do it, the fewer problems they'll have at the end of it.
And a lot of this is because of, as it were, the happy thought that we are living longer. I was doing some of the maths on this myself, and I think back in the 50s and 60s, pensions cost about 2% of our GDP, and it's now beyond 8% and rising. There comes a point when it's, as we both agree, it's unaffordable. Do you think any party leader, however, is going to break step? Because at the last election, your party wasn't just offering the triple lock, they were offering more than the triple lock plus a tax guarantee called the triple lock plus.
Yeah, I know. And the longer this bidding war goes on, then the worse it gets. I do think pensioners deserve reassurance and protection, my own modest suggestion is that you should pick one bit of the triple lock, the average earnings link,
and stick with that.
Link pension increases to that. Now, ironically, you've just said what pensions are going up to next year. That's because average earnings have gone up quite a lot. That's the highest of the three measures at the moment. So it wouldn't make any difference to that. But over time, I think I would happily defend that on the grounds that it's fair, so that when the working population is doing well and average earnings are rising higher than inflation, possibly, then pensioners would benefit from that. But if there are times when, for whatever reason, the country is having a problem with a recession and therefore earnings go down, then pensioners' increases will go down as well, but by no more than the average working wage. And I think that is saleable as a fair proposition.
It makes a lot of sense. Everybody, working and pensioner, standing, as it were, shoulder to shoulder. The big problem, I guess, has been that compared to younger people, pensioners vote. They're vocal, as we saw over the winter fuel allowance row, and they vote in very large numbers, whereas younger Britons tend to be less keen on voting. Therefore, isn't the message, as it were, to youthful Britain, get out there and vote, become involved in politics, or you will carry on being screwed in this way?
That is exactly right. One of the things, I mean, like all MPs, when I was an MP, I used to go around to lots of sixth forms. I quite enjoyed it. And one of the standard questions they all ask is, why don't politicians listen to people like us, 18-year-olds? To which I would briskly say, because you don't vote, there aren't many of you. There are twice as many as a proportion of the population pensioners as you lot. And 2/3 of them vote and 1/3 of you vote. If you were a politician, who would you listen to, young people or old people? And they would all nod their heads and say, yeah, fair enough. So the more we get the message out for people to vote, or a particular group to vote, the more politicians will listen to them. I
very much hope, Damian, that our youthful and vigorous audience is listening and will take appropriate action in due course. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Coming up, a court case is underway as the provocative programme Spitting Image takes aim at somebody who can only be described as a genuine national treasure, Paddington Bear. More on that soon, but the time now 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Would installing anti-knife archers in schools prevent more pupils from being killed? Or would it indicate the battle against knife crime is being lost?
Ian Dale on LBC.
Mickey could try to sell his car privately. Or get it sold today with We Buy Any Car. He could spend days on end trying to sell to a bunch of time wasters. Or sell in a flash and head to the fun fair with the kids. Proper gutted. Or proper impressed. To get a quote in 30 seconds, enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com.
Business healthcare sounds pricey.
At Penistone Health, it's less than £16 per employee per month, which
will go up when people use it.
Actually, no. We don't do price hikes each time our services are used. Just
medical questionnaires for everyone.
No. And it's quick and easy to join.
Sounds great. I'm in.
Penistone Health. Healthcare done different. Fee review periodically. T's and C's apply. Selected surgical procedures. Immediate access for businesses. Wait periods apply for personal membership. UK only. Visit penistone.co.uk.
So, what's on your to-do list today? Why don't you check if you're eligible for pension credit? It tops up your pension income and also opens up help with heating bills, council tax, and more. Search pension credit on gov.uk or call 0800 99 1234. There's nothing to lose. Check today. Pension credit. Credit where credit's due. Eligibility criteria apply.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:51. Next Sunday, November the 2nd, the clocks go back an hour for the end of daylight saving time. But some MPs don't like the current system. Here is Alex Mayer, the Labour MP for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, quoting our wartime Prime Minister this afternoon.
As Britain faced peril in World War II, Winston Churchill took a radical step. He changed the clocks to shift extra daylight into the evenings. As the clocks go back this weekend, would the Prime Minister take a look at the evidence on trialling Churchill time again to cut carbon, reduce bills, improve road safety, boost the hospitality industry, and be the Prime Minister who will brighten up all of our lives?
Well, Alex is in the studio now. Thanks for coming in, Alex. What, in practical terms, would Churchill time mean for us now?
So basically, if you think whatever kind of amount of daylight there is at the moment, it would shift the clocks to bring an extra hour of daylight into the evenings, away from the mornings and into the evenings.
So we'd have darker mornings, but we'd have brighter evenings.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned all the reasons for that. I think this idea started actually in the First World War, I've read, because they were trying to save energy then. And Churchill kind of doubled it in World War II, is that right?
Yeah, so daylight saving goes back a long time, as you rightly say, and it's always been done by an Act of Parliament. So originally in World War I, we got our first daylight saving, which we have today. In World War II, Winston Churchill went a step further and he introduced double British summer time, which is what I'm calling for, Churchill time. And he did it. He was saying it was to boost morale. It was also to save energy, which is something which would be good again today, I think.
It certainly would be. It is a bit of a hardy perennial, this one, and we know that Scots, anyone in the north of the archipelago, farmers and others are also quite hostile to this. Do you think there is some chance of actual movement on it?
The NFU are neutral on the subject. Most farming is now quite automated, and I'm not sure that cows know what
That's
kind
interesting.
of...
Okay, I hadn't thought of that.
What the time is. The hospitality industry, who have been in Westminster with me today, are very supportive of this. So are our road safety charities. It could cut up to 60 deaths a year on our roads by shifting that daylight into the evening, and it would be a real boost to jobs and growth.
I was going to come on to that, because if you could persuade the Chancellor of the Exchequer that this was a growth measure, she'd put her thumb up immediately, because that's what you all need. So tell me a little bit about why it would be a growth measure. Simply because people would be working for longer or spending more in the evenings, or what? Spending
more in the evenings. So if you think about things like October half term, which is always a bit kind of gloomy, we've got a whole load of organisations on board who say that could bring a real boost to the economy, with more people spending more money in the leisure and hospitality sectors, including, for example, Clacton Pier, who are signed up to this and think it's a jolly good idea.
Have you had a chance to speak to ministers directly about this? Is there a kind of lobbying campaign going on behind the scenes or anything?
It's something I talk to ministers about every so often, more often when the clocks are going backwards and forwards, because they take more notice of me then. But it's something we want to get a whole lot of different MPs and peers and other organisations involved in, to try and build that momentum. Because, as I said, we've had a good event in Parliament today. Lots of MPs, cross parties, and peers, lords, time lords I call them, have come along to discuss this and to try and make sure that the government do see this as a possibility, something that we could trial and see whether it really does bring those jobs and growth.
And very good for my mental health as well.
Absolutely.
Alex Mayer, thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio. Finally, a story of significance to the entire British nation. Who is Paddington Bear? The creators of the book and film franchise are suing Spitting Image, who have introduced a foul-mouthed, cocaine-snorting version of Paddington, co-hosting a podcast with Prince Harry, although conceivably not the real Prince Harry. It's sometimes hard to tell. Now, Paddington, we know, has already served time, so where this ends, it's hard to say. Let's have a listen to the bear in question, and a warning to sensitive souls out there, he is not as cuddly as the previous one.
Now I'm officially at war with Studio C Anal. I have to look at the part. Or not the part, depending on your legal point of view.
You're part of Paddington Action, a dangerous threat to lol-hating, onion-wearing French film execs.
See, Harry, but relax. Those frogs have form when it comes to waving white flags. My lawyer, Dirty Sanchez, says we can win this thing, muchacho.
I know it's highly unlikely because they're French, but what if they don't back down immediately?
Don't worry, Essay. I'll get Trump to mediate.
He's a very, very scary-looking version of Paddington indeed. Let's hear now from the caricaturist and cartoonist who designed the caricature heads for Spitting Image back in the 1990s and in the latest ITV reboot as well, Mark Reeve. Mark, great to have you on the show. Love your work, as they say in the industry. Lots and lots of people have been absolutely savaged by Spitting Image over the years, and I don't think anybody has sued you before. Is that right?
I don't think so, no. But if they did, it'd be very good publicity. So yes.
So you get these well-known figures, and when it first came out, I mean, everybody watched it. It was a huge thing, and I can remember Norman Tebbit as the Chingford skinhead, and Margaret Thatcher, and the rest of it. And it did have some big political impact. I mean, people saw politicians, as it were, through the lens of Spitting Image. Now you're online basically. You've got a new online version. Do you think you could have anything like the same impact? I guess it depends how funny it is, how good the jokes are.
That's the only criteria. Is it funny? And it is. It's extremely funny. It's also great publicity, I assume. So why the? It's.
But taking pot shots at our royal family, that's one thing. But taking pot shots at Paddington Bear, isn't that going a little bit too far?
I don't know. I mean, is it really going to affect the brand that much? I assume there are age controls on the YouTube channels. So.
No, I was just really thinking that Paddington Bear is the kind of, alongside Judi Dench and David Attenborough, is probably the ultimate kind of national icon. No wonder this is getting onto front pages of newspapers as a story.
Well, do you think Spitting Image, they did the Queen Mother famously, and that was one.
Yeah, that's nothing compared to Paddington Bear.
Yeah. You don't think so? No?
Oh, no, I'm afraid so. Paddington Bear all the way.
Well, he is something actually. I loved Paddington Bear when I was a child, but I don't see how this really affects it. I don't know why they're getting so upset. It seems ridiculous to me personally. But
did you yourself do any of the voices, or were you the images only?
No, I was caricatures. I drew and sculpted for them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It was the voiceover people and the actors. They got to go to all the awards. We didn't.
Oh.
They called us the Risk Monkeys.
The Risk Monkeys. But presumably also, lots of people wanted their Spitting Image statues at home.
Well, Roger, I remember Roger Law talking about this, because when he came to sell off a load of them years ago, people don't realise that the latex and the way they were painted, they tend to age very badly. So by the time they bought these things and got them home, they were sort of zombie flaking everywhere, so they didn't look quite like they were supposed to.
That's right, not something you'd want even in the loo. Well, absolutely fascinating. We'll be watching the case very carefully. Mark Reeve, thanks so much for talking to LBC tonight. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can read and watch the latest from LBC. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Now, the parents of 15-year-old Harvey...
never, ever want anybody to go through what we've gone through.
Now, the parents of 15-year-old Harvey Wilgoose, who was knifed to death